Hello again, class. This will be our second lesson on the Revolutionary War. When we left off in our previous lesson, the Continental Congress had voted on Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence. And so as of July 2nd, the colonists, at least the people in the Continental Congress, considered themselves free from Britain. But they still needed to explain their actions to the world. They still needed to make it official. So while they had been debating for most of June about independence, as you recall, Thomas Jefferson, the committee he was on with Adams and Franklin, were working on the Declaration of Independence. All right, so on July 4th, 1776, Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. All right, you see the picture there on the right. It has that date, July 4th, 1776. It has the signatures below. And as you'll notice, it's not that long of a document. It all fits on one page there. Now that was bigger than the piece of notebook paper you'd have in your binder or notebook. It was a big piece of paper, but still, they could get it all on one piece of paper. All right, so again, draw 13 stars next to that sentence. You need to know July 4th, 1776 is the date the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Okay. But not before Congress made changes to Jefferson's draft. Because he was the primary author, and he's the person who gets credit for it today. But again, you had to have all of these people sign it, and so they each were allowed to give their opinions on it. And so some of them suggested changes, and by all accounts, Jefferson basically sat in the corner and kind of pouted about it because he thought his first draft was perfect and got his feelings hurt when someone suggested other language. For instance, one of the things they took out was a clause that blamed Britain for the American slave trade. Thomas Jefferson tried to lay the blame for the slave trade in America on Britain and say, well, we need our independence because you people over there in Parliament caused us to have a slave trade. You can form your own opinions as to the sincerity or the accuracy of that statement. But nonetheless, it was originally in there in one draft, and then it was taken out. All right, so John Hancock. He was the president of the Continental Congress. Now, do not get this confused. This does not mean he was the president of the United States. Okay, he was not. All right, some students sometimes see that he's the president of the Congress and think, well, that means he was the president of the United States. No, that's not true. It just means he was sort of the leader of the Continental Congress. Not of the whole country, but just of that group of men, the Continental Congress. Anyway, as a leader, he was the first to sign, and thus was the first to commit treason in writing. Because what these signers are doing is they are writing down that basically that King George is not their king anymore. Okay, and this is an act of treason, saying that they no longer have to follow the king or pledge loyalty to the king. This is an act of treason, and John Hancock was the first to sign it. And he signed it. His was the largest signature on the page. This is why John Hancock is sometimes a synonym for just the word signature. All right, sometimes people say, oh, well, put your John Hancock right here. That means put your signature right here. So he wrote in clear, large letters and is claimed, we don't really know if this is true, may not be. But anyway, the story goes that he claimed there, I guess King George will be able to read that. Okay, so he signed his name very clearly, very largely, willing to take whatever the consequences were for so openly committing treason. A total of 56 men ended up signing the Declaration of Independence. Now, within the preamble, it holds, I don't know, maybe possibly the most famous sentence in at least American writings. All right, I'm sure there are others you could argue. Dr. Luther King's I Have a Dream, the line of that, some lines from the Gettysburg Address or the Constitution. But certainly the preamble to the Declaration of Independence is as famous as anything written by an American. And what Jefferson wrote was, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Okay? Now, understand that phrase, know that phrase. Okay? This is, in some extent, this is the cornerstone of the American philosophy. Our country is founded upon this simple philosophy, that these truths are self-evident. All right, self-evident means that it's evident to yourself. No one has to prove it to you. That what Jefferson is saying here is that what comes next, everything else in this sentence, is so obvious. It doesn't even have to be proven. It is self-evident. All right, it is. If you've ever lived in Texas in August, it is self-evident that it is hot. All right, no one has to convince you of that. It's obvious. It's hot when you go outside. Okay, so this is what the Declaration is saying. These truths are so obvious; they're self-evident, and it says that all men are created equal. All right, now we can debate what he meant by men. Was he really meaning just men are created equal and not women, or, as was somewhat custom at the time, men can kind of be used to refer to basically all of mankind, all of humankind. All right, now we don't have time to dive too deeply into what and debate whether this is meant or not. But certainly nowadays we read that as meaning people, even if Jefferson may or may not have meant it that way. We certainly read this to mean that all people are created equal, that they are endowed, which means given. Endowed means given to, given by. That they are endowed by their Creator. All right. So again, Jefferson is referring to a higher being. You can argue whether he meant God, like the Christian God, or God is the deitist God. Many of the founders were deitists. Or whether he was just talking about Mother Nature. But whoever you believe created the universe and the earth, that Creator is the one who gave these rights. And these are unalienable rights. Unalienable means cannot be taken away. All right. So Jefferson's saying is that what is obvious is that everybody's created equal, that they're given rights by their Creator that can't be taken away. And that among these, okay, not limited to, but among these, included all, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? And so again, arguably, this is the philosophy. This one sentence is the philosophy upon which America was created. All right, that everybody's equal. That we are all born with rights that cannot be taken away. And that some of these rights are the right to life, the right to liberty, which is basically freedom, and the right to pursue happiness, basically in however we can, or in however way that pleases us, as long as we don't infringe upon others' rights. Now, as we've seen, we talked about John Locke before. Much of the Declaration is based on his philosophy. All right. For example, the Declaration states that people have unalienable rights which can't be taken away. John Locke had written that people have natural rights. Okay? John Locke wrote that people have the right to life, liberty, and property. Jefferson changes that to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? All right, so much of the Declaration, so this is Preamble, is based on the writings of John Locke. All right, so what about the rest of the Declaration? That's not the first sentence, what I just read. That's actually the second sentence, but it's up in there in the introduction. And I should have told you that. Preamble is just another name for introduction. The rest of it, the Declaration, though, goes on and adds that if a government violates these rights, and again, this still would be within that general introduction preamble area, that if a government ignores or violates these rights, then the people have the right to abolish the government. And after abolishing the old government, the people can then form a new government to protect their rights. All right, so let's take a moment to focus on what Jefferson is saying here. Remember, for the last 10 years, the colonists have been saying no taxation without representation, no taxation without representation. They've continuously blamed Parliament, as well as King George, for violating their rights. They're saying, look, you are imposing laws upon people who have no representation in Parliament. You can't force us to agree to a law that we didn't have a hand in making. This is a violation of our human rights. All right, that's what the colonists have been saying for 10 years. So when we write the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson says, well, everybody has rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government ignores or violates these rights, then the people have the right to abolish or destroy the government. Right? So he's basically saying a government can only exist if it is protecting people's rights. And if it is not protecting people's rights, then the people are able to destroy the government and create a new one. So, after setting out this principle, the Declaration then explains why the 13 colonists are breaking away from Britain. Okay. In other words, it's going to list every mean and unfair thing that the King and Parliament did to the poor old colonies. Okay? This is called the Grievance section. All right? These are grievances. All right, so let's review this. Jefferson starts by saying the Creator gave, well, first of all people are equal, and the Creator gave them rights such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that any government that does not protect these rights should be abolished and replaced with a new one. That's basically the preamble. That's the first section. The second section, Jefferson's going to list all of the ways in which Parliament and the King have not been upholding the colonists' rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All right. He's going to list things, like the Boston Port Act. And he's not going to name it specifically, but he's going to describe it. The Massachusetts Government Act. All right, the fact that the King and Parliament weren't allowing certain colonists to have self-government anymore, that they weren't allowed to have town hall meetings without permission, that the Parliament was forcing the colonists to quarter soldiers in their homes. All these things that we talked about in our last unit, all the things that the colonists were complaining about, Jefferson now basically lists them out in detail. And so look at all these things that have been violative of our rights. Okay? So again, structure is we have rights. Any government that violates these rights must be abolished. And then the second section is, okay, now here are all the ways that Britain has been violating our rights. Right? And you can see where the conclusion is. Right? Jefferson says, look, we attempted to address these grievances. All right, think back to our previous lesson where we talked about the olive branch petition. Jefferson says we addressed these grievances, but the King ignored them. Therefore, the colonies must now declare their independence. Okay? This is what Jefferson's saying. Again, Jefferson, he's almost setting it up sort of like an algebraic proof, okay, like a mathematical proof. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. All right, that's what Thomas Jefferson has done here. He starts in the preamble. If a government violates the people's unalienable rights, then the government can be abolished. That's the A equals B. Then he says, okay, Britain has unquestionably violated the colonist rights over and over again. That's the B equals C. So then Jefferson says, okay, well remember we said if you're not violating the rights, if a government is not protecting a people's rights, and instead violating, then the people can destroy that government and create a new one. And so what he does in this third section, basically the A equals C part of this equation, he says, okay, Since they have violated our rights, we have the right to declare independence, and therefore we are now declaring independence. Okay? That's what Jefferson has done with the Declaration of Independence. Right? It's somewhat of a mathematical equation there. Now, again, you don't have to take notes on this, but Benjamin Franklin maybe, possibly, probably not if you ask me, but it's possible it said this: we must all hang together or we shall all hang separately. And remember, now Franklin, earlier in this year, we studied his political cartoon, the first political cartoon in America, talking about how the colonists must either join or die, right? He's saying this same thing. All right? The penalty for treason is to be hanged. And so what Franklin is saying is we must all hang together, meaning we must all stick together, we must all work together, or we will all hang separately, meaning that they're going to be hanged at the end of a noose, all right? Or executed for treason. Again, this is a quote that is attributed to Franklin. I'm not sure there's a whole lot of perfect or real believable proof that he actually said it, but it sounds good, so we'll give him credit for saying it. Okay, we're going to end this lesson here. The next one we'll get back to the war itself. Right, now that we've talked about independence, and because now it is clear what the colonists are fighting for. In 1775, it wasn't clear what they were fighting for. Maybe they were just fighting for the repeal of the Intolerable Acts. Maybe they were just fighting for a promise to never again have taxation without representation. Maybe they're going to be fighting for independence. It wasn't clear in 1775, but as of July 4th, 1776, it's clear what the colonists are fighting for. They're fighting for their independence. They're fighting for the right to create a new country.